All right.
Okay.
Hello and welcome to
The
the
SBS
SBS
podcast.
podcast.
I'm your host, Mariam.
Amen.
We did rehearse that. We
We
still
can
got it wrong.
start that again. You can go
All
again.
right.
Yeah. You're the host.
I'm your host, Mariam, and this is,
I'm your hosty man.
and today we have a special guest speaker with us, Fatima. Fatima, do you want to give us a little spiel, a little introduction on who you are and what your specialties are?
Yeah, for sure. My background is as a dietitian. So, I studied nutrition and then I did a master's in dietetics. I graduated now, like over 12 years ago. And I think my career has sort of just been very varied. I started off working in Brisbane in private practice. So, it was like one of those standard new graduate dietitian, apply for every single job under the sun, don't get a single one, who knows why. And it's like, okay, I'm not relying on the system for my career. And I just started my own practice. I had one doctor come up to me and go, oh, you know what? You're a Muslim woman of color who wears hijab. My patients are basically going to recognize you or like feel comfortable because they look like you. Can I refer people to you? And I was like, oh, so that's kind of like where my niche originated, was just this lady who was like, hey, I want to send some clients to you. And then I grew my practice. 2 years in, I got married, and my husband is from Zambia, which is in Africa. And so I am originally Zimbabwean myself. So I know Africa fairly well, in the Southern African countries, so it wasn't a big deal for me. I moved across to live in Zambia with him, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna just be a dietitian there. I'm just gonna do the same thing, but there's no dietetics in the country, so it was sort of like, well, I'm the one of two or three dietitians spotted around the country who have all been internationally trained, but the caliber of, I guess, nutrition professionals there is nutritionists with a diploma. So the Ministry of Agriculture basically introduced this diploma because they were like, oh, we need some like people who have these nutrition qualifications to work in the Ministry of Agriculture. So that
Yeah.
whole program was really focused on agriculture, with a few dots of nutrition. So the nutritionists in the country kind of overflowed. They were like, okay, we'll take them into Ministry of Health, and then they were like out of their depth, and I ended up falling into becoming a lecturer at the University of Zambia. And it was just a coincidence how it happened, really. I dropped off my papers to get registered in the country, and someone picked it up and called me and was like, hey, we want to give you a job. I'm like, oh, I just wanted to get registered, but okay, what's the plan?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I ended up lecturing on the first like BSc in nutrition in the country, which was a pretty amazing opportunity. So there were all these people with diplomas coming in and finally upskilling in like a proper BSc level nutrition. So I did that for 4 years. And then I was just kind of like ants in my pants. I was missing that whole face-to-face interaction with people, because that's my ultimate like passion, is like actually engaging with a person, seeing them make change, working on that behavioral change. Like that's what I really, really loved. So after I had my first son, I was like, okay, I'm going to give this private practice thing a go again. And I said Bismillah, and I just did it. And I sort of just grew that, let go of the lecturing, and focused on my own company for the next 6 years or so, which was where I dipped my toes in private practice, opened up a little bit of like, what do you call them? Like, like when you go and do outpatient clinics in hospitals. Yeah,
Yeah.
so we would do, it was like clinics, right? And then I ended up in corporate nutrition and doing public workshops. So I was a little bit all over the place under my brand. And before I migrated back to Australia in 2022, I had a couple of consultants who carried on my business as I moved here. And now I have been dibbling and dabbling in the online space since COVID. And so I had that to ride off, and I've been focusing on that and managing my business in Zambia and being a mom. And that's kind of where I'm at right now. And that's I guess, the short version of it.
A lot of experience, then a lot of exposure to different people and different
Yes.
backgrounds there would add
Yeah.
to your repertoire. Really good.
Yeah, I feel very blessed for having been able to work in such a different environment in nutrition. I think it's like a perspective that when you come back to the first world, no one gets, which is, I feel like, and I guess what I use as my asset, right?
Yeah, I think people forget like how much of a disparity there is in the access to nutrition services and just
100%,
nutrition
yeah.
professionals in general overseas, in different countries, but particularly, you know, third world countries, or, you know, a lot of the countries that our families are from. A
Yeah,
lot of these services are not accessible. So,
yeah,
yeah, I can imagine the breadth of knowledge that you sort of bring into your practice with a lot of that experience.
yeah,
And obviously into your current niche, which
yeah,
is sort of sustainable weight loss for,
yeah,
you know, women from cultural and ethnic backgrounds, and sort
yeah.
of making the two marry each other and work together. So tell us a little bit about like how that interest came about in terms of weight loss and
Yeah.
following your, you know, cultural patterns of eating and things like that.
Yeah, so I think after I left Zambia, I was kind of like, I didn't have that like touch point, like face to face with that population anymore, but I was still super passionate about it. So I was like, well, how do I still be this person online, but I'm not actually in the country anymore? Like, how do I base it? Took me a good 2 years, if I'm very honest, to finally get to that place where I was like, okay, who am I going to be in Australia? Like, what is my jam? And it went from like I did everything to, you know, there is so much noise online on how to run a business. And obviously, you know, you get information from here and you're supposed to niche down, and then someone else is like, don't niche down. And I think I got lost in all the elements of social media management and business management for a year or two before I finally kind of like came together and went, okay, these are the things that I'm really passionate about. And this is how I feel like I'm going to make it work. Because at the end of the day, everyone that comes to you will often be because, you know, okay, maybe they want to reduce cholesterol, maybe they have diabetes or whatever it is, but the core theme is they need to lose weight or they want to lose weight. And so it's embedded in almost every single consultation that I've ever had. It's almost always a weight loss element or a weight gain element, actually, as well. So weight management was definitely something that I was like, yep, the need and the group of people that needed is huge. And then the cultural element came in because I saw the gap. I saw like very few people representing or showing cultural foods. And I guess I haven't really specifically made it African foods or anything like that, because I also have a very like mixed background because I'm Indian, like like, you know, but I'm third generation Zimbabwean as well. So if I went to India, they're like, you're not
Yeah.
Indian. And if
Okay.
I go to Zimbabwe, they're like, but you're not fully Zimbabwean either. And then you come to Australia, they're like, yeah, you're not fully Aussie either. So it's like there's a blend. So that's why I didn't want to like say very specifically a particular one, because you know, when you work with, you know, the CAD communities here in Australia, there's so many people from so many different places. You know, we've got refugees from all sorts of different parts of the world. And I love that concept of, okay, even if you come to me and you got a new like cuisine, I want to learn it, and I'll go gung ho and like create a meal plan from scratch and go and learn all about their foods. And I think there's an adventurous element to that as well. So it's basically putting it into, or translating all of that stuff that we learn into something that visually appeals to people from different backgrounds, rather than always seeing the same, like, you know, those like salmon and brown rice and asparagus meal prep things that you see all over Instagram. And like, you know, like I want people to see their foods and not see weight loss as, oh, I've got to eat that stuff to get there. And oh, of course, I'm not going to be able to do it because I'm not going to eat that. Like, that's so boring. I'm going to have it 3 times and then I'm just going to be done with it and then go binge on something else. So
On that
I
line,
want,
did you notice that, for example, coming compared to Brisbane and South Africa, where you were the same sort of public health system? Was it the same sort of public health systems that you were managing, like weight loss, for example? Was that also a big issue in South Africa as compared to Brisbane?
Yeah, so in like I guess in general, when you look at the landscape of nutrition in, let's say, Southern Africa, right? Um, you have what they call the triple burden of disease. So you basically, with the triple burden of disease, it's three different core things. You've got malnutrition or undernutrition, like smack bang in the face. That's where you're going to see all your NGOs. They're going to be pumping in the funds there, and you're going to see, the undernourished population, mothers and children, really, really focused on. Like that's the hub of nutrition. But in the background, what's also happening is you've got that overnutrition happening, and then you've got other elements of nutrition like infectious diseases and things like that that also play a role as well. But because chronic disease is kind of happening quietly on the side, it's not yet boomed because the focus is still here. But what's happening is, yes, that's the area that I was focusing on is that whole urbanization that's happening, that change in people's diet where they're going away from their traditional diets and they're having more and more commercially available processed foods. It's changing their entire health profile, and they're now their chronic disease is growing exponentially, but no one's addressing it just yet properly because I don't know, there has to be certain criteria that need to be met for something to go on a billboard or look good or be funded, which is a whole nother can of worms, right? But I would focus in on that. Like in the hospitals, I'd have the doctors sending me all the diabetics, all the hypertensives, all the people with gut issues, like all those really common chronic everyday sorts of things. And that's, I guess, where I was focusing. So it is a big issue. It's just not being brought to the surface and addressed yet. It's like this quiet background thing that's just happening.
Same Western problems that we have in the Western world, it's also traveling
Yes.
to other parts of the world.
Yeah, it's happening now. Yeah. Whereas before they were kind of, I guess, protected in some sense because of the lack of access. But now, like local companies, big, the really big companies, they're producing the same sweetened beverages, processed, ultra processed foods, all of those kind of things, and they're cheap and they're available and they're locally produced and they're everywhere. So like you would usually drive around in Africa and you'd have like fruit stalls and like people selling their fresh produce, and you'd stop at the traffic lights and they would come to you with their baskets. And now you're seeing more and more little stalls where they've just got like crisps, chocolates, lollies, coming around with the cooler box of sweetened drinks. Everything, I've watched it change in the last 20, 25 years, going back and forth, living there, how much it's changed. So yeah, that access is just, it's so easy now, and people don't know better because there's no public education on it.
Yeah, interesting. I can definitely resonate with that. Even in like from where my family's from, Lebanon. The last time I've only been there once, and I was there when I was 14. But you had these little backyard kind of milk bars everywhere. And yeah, it was just like so much accessibility for like your chips, like your lollies, your chocolate. I remember I was quite young at the time. I was 14, but I remember putting on so much weight when I was in Lebanon just because of the drastic change in my diet. It was such a big change in my diet, and I was having a lot more sort of processed foods. And obviously with economic factors and things like inflation, and there's all these different factors, but obviously all of these things have a big impact on overall health outcomes, and also how much we're often able to access and help some of these people in these countries. And yeah, I think that, like you said, the health education is the biggest thing. What do you find some of the barriers when you're working with women from different cultural backgrounds when it comes to nutrition or making nutrition changes?
Yeah, so I guess it depends on the individual, because I think that your socioeconomic status is going to lend to different barriers, right? There's the stock standard. If you're going to come from a lower socioeconomic background, you're not going to have access, right? So you've got to make a do with what's available. So if I was doing community work, for example, with some of the women, I might say to them, okay, you need to eat more fresh produce or more protein, but they don't have fridges and stuff like that. Like they're gonna have protein when they get the chicken and they eat and they slaughter it and pop it in the pot, maybe once a month. They're not gonna have
Yeah.
fresh eggs available all the time. And even dairy, like they don't have a place to store it. So their protein sources tend to be things like dried beans, and soya chunks, like soya products. So you
Yes.
like that can sometimes be the challenge is just access, right? Access and then getting creative with, okay, well, how do I get them to have what they need, or how do I, basically get to them in a way that I'm going to give them a balanced diet. So when I guess finances is the issue, that can be a big challenge. But the beauty of the population that I worked with is when you give them knowledge, they jump and they listen. And there isn't this barrier of like a whole bunch of different like mental blocks of, oh, I've got emotional element here, or it's hard to do it. You tell them what to do and they
The
do
ego.
it. And it just is like magic, like the lady will walk in, she's newly diabetic, she listens to every word you say, she comes back the next session, she's done it all. Her sugars are balanced, kalas, it's the end. Like that's it. It's just so easy. And that's one thing I miss like a lot is that people, as soon as you just give them that basic thing, like this is how it works, that's it. They do it. They
Maybe
implement
because
it.
there's so
So
many options.
I
So
guess
many
that's the opposite of a barrier, but when you do provide the knowledge, it's just like their ability to implement it is really, really high, whether it's a motivational element or whatever it is. But as soon as it goes to ching up here and it's like, oh, okay, that's what I got to do, they just do it. But then of course, like on the other side of things, there's also going to be other barriers, like from the community element, where it's like, um, size is perceived as an indication of wealth.
yeah.
So I would get so many women who would come in and like they'd gone to the nurse and they'd done their weights and they'd dropped X number of kilos, but then when they walk in, they were angry with me. And I was like, but you lost 5 kilos. Like, isn't that the goal? Yeah, but now my husband doesn't like me. And I'm like,
I need to
okay.
get out.
Well, this is a whole nother story. So it's like there is these
Yeah.
cultural
Yeah.
beauty standards that or even practices in a sense that you also have to navigate around, which is interesting. So it's like, okay, yes, you've lost the weight, but let's balance it out in terms of your health and why this is important versus what your husband wants slash what the community will think of you. So there's some interesting different, I guess, cultural beliefs and practices, and it varies from culture to culture, but
Yeah.
that can sometimes be a barrier as well. It's like, okay, well, you want to lose weight but you can't lose too much, but you got to look after your health. So that would always be I guess something else that I would often like have to like navigate as well with some of the women. It's very, I guess the barriers are very different a lot of the time.
But I could imagine even, for example, immigrants, when they've immigrated here, they still have like there's still that cultural shift that you have to address where you're like, okay, you have to cut down on the fat, you have to cut down on the saturated fat because it's been such a huge part of their culture and their diet. And I think that's one of the things we were talking about yesterday, which is how do you address that? Okay, I know back home we use samneh, we use ghee and everything,
Yeah.
but here now it's not that good for you anymore.
Yeah.
How do you get through that?
Yeah, I think the easiest thing is just knowledge is everything. So like when you can explain to them why, and then show them they can still have it, but here's how you modify it. You just have to have less of it. Or like my favorite terminology is these are going to be your everyday foods and these are going to be your sometimes foods. So if you're not going to have biryani any other way except with the level of fat that you want it to have so it tastes good, then make it a sometimes food and have it with that level of fat, but have it sometimes. And think about which things have less that you can have more regularly. So I think that tends to be a easier way. Some people are willing to compromise in modifying their recipes,
Yeah.
and other people are like, if you're going to eat it like this, you got to eat it the way it's meant to be eaten.
Yeah.
So with that case, I'm like, okay, well, in that case, have it less often. And that generally tends to do the trick, I think.
That's really good. Yeah. Do you have anything to add?
No, I'm actually really enjoying this conversation and this thread where Miriam's taking over at the moment.
Yeah.
I do like
Yeah.
how you've kind of incorporated their cultural practices into their dietary meal plans, but also modified it in a sort of more healthy manner, let's say. So
Yeah.
I think that's a really important aspect when working with our culture is,
Yeah.
for example, if we're doing a meal plan, it's like, for example, we have like molokhia or something like that. It's like, okay, we're not going to swap it for like quinoa
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
some, a trending diet. We're going to stick to your food, but let's try and make it better.
Yeah. Yeah, that's
So
it. As
that's a
soon as
really good,
something
that's
is
a really
too
good, yeah.
different or it's not sustainable, they're not going to eat it, or they have to make separate meals for themselves compared to their family, you just know
Yeah.
it's not going to last. So I always tell my clients, if this is how you can say, yes, I can eat like this forever, then we found the solution. If there's still something that you dislike, or you're finding it difficult and we can't overcome that barrier, we need to find a different way of doing it. It's got to be a
Yeah.
forever thing that we're like, yep, I'm happy, I enjoy this, I can do it.
I think one of the big things, I'm going to let you say something.
Yeah, I was gonna say, how do you create the bridge between, evidence-based nutrition practices and sort of merging that with, cultural sensitivity and also client goals. For example, me and Miriam were discussing like the Mediterranean diet, how there's, obviously a lot of research on the Mediterranean diet for a range of different conditions. So what are your thoughts on, some of these dietary approaches that we've got a lot of evidence for, and, sort of tailoring that or sort of merging aspects of that with the clients that you're working with in practice to also meet their health goals where they're at? So how do you sort of make a, sort of integrate all of these different aspects?
Yeah. I hate the fact that we've coined one particular diet as the holy grail. And
Yeah.
I say it to everyone. I'm like, why have you decided to coin this one as the best? Because
Yep.
if you look at a lot of traditional diets, right? Let's take the Malawian diet, for example, right? They're like one of the poorest countries in Africa, but if you look at their diet, there's people that have done studies on them. And again, remember, studies happen when you have funding, right?
Yeah.
So there's an entire world of evidence that has not been found because no one has put the money into it.
Yes.
Yep.
So if you're going to come and put money into my country, I'm going to be able to become the new Holy Grail if I wanted to. So the Malawian diet, for example, there was some gut health research where there was like mapping microbiomes, and they were looking at, that key element of diversity being the gold standard. Like the more diverse your microbiome is, the better your gut health is. That's the general consensus, right? And if you look at the microbiome of the Malawian population who lived in rural Malawi with a proper traditional diet, very minimal urbanization, it's up here. It's up here compared to, I think they compared it, was it to a Finnish population or Danish population? I'll find the study, but it's just, I was like, okay, this is gold. Someone actually like went in, spent the money, did the research, and came out and showed you that, look, this
Yeah.
traditional diet is amazing. So why are we not now going and going, hey everyone, let's all, eat the Malawian diet, and like, holding it up there and getting sponsors? It's just all comes down to where the money goes, right?
Yeah.
So if you look at the foundations of the Mediterranean diet, whole grains,
Yeah.
right? Any culture, you can choose a whole grain. I can tell you have brown roti instead of white roti. Cha-ching. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, it's simple. It's just the concepts that we need to be promoting rather than just a particular diet, right? Because then it's like, oh, well, I don't have olive oil in my country, or I can't access salmon in my country, but you
Yes.
can have other healthy fats because we know the goal is lots of rich and healthy fats. So where are you going to get this from? And I can go on and on with the examples, but that's, I guess, is in a nutshell where it's all at. It's just that give us the funding, we'll give you the evidence for every single diet, but it's the foundational key concepts
Yeah.
that we need to
Yeah.
promote.
So
Whole
much.
grains, lots
Yeah.
of healthy fats, lots
Yes.
of fruits and vegetables, more
Yeah.
plants. It's the same no matter where you put it, whether it's an Afghani diet or Somalian diet or a Finnish diet or wherever it is. Um, if you're following that base, you're gonna get good health as the outcome, right?
So I guess, just to summarize some of what you said in terms of, a sustainable weight loss, following your cultural diet seems like a really superior option.
Yeah, because you're gonna sustain it.
Gonna stick to
The
it.
key word, right? Culture is also your identity, right? You are, it's very deeply rooted in us, the foods that we eat, right? Whether it's childhood favorites or whatever it is, but you're gonna go to the weddings in your community, those foods are gonna be there. You're gonna have certain foods that are attached to celebration on certain things as well, right? So it all just comes down to that element of what is closest to me, and then you can stick to that. So that's the solution.
I think reflecting on that, especially in regards to, I don't know if you've worked with the Aboriginal population, but it's, one of the big public health issue is they can't, one of the reasons why the interventions have never worked is because they've never addressed it at a cultural level. And so we see how important culture is when it comes to changing our beliefs around certain things, certain foods, certain practices, whatever. It's a deep belief system that needs to be addressed at
Yeah.
the root.
Yeah, I was at
We were just laughing because she was, I can hear her daughter like
Oh yeah,
crying in the
it's all
background. She just woke up. You can hear her cooing and stuff. So we weren't
That's
laughing
okay.
at you. I was just laughing at
No,
her.
no, not at all. I figured, I'm like, baby's up. I could see it in her eyes.
You're like there and you're not there. You're like,
Oh, that's all right. I've been through it. I have done online consultations with my kids with me. I've been through it. You're talking about the Aboriginal population. I learned so much in the last 2 years. Um, just on even how you communicate with them. I learned about what they call um, yarning circles. So like you get together and that's how you would do a consultation. Like the whole concept of coming into a room, closing the door and having two people talk to each other is so overwhelming and not for them. So I've actually just been reading quite a bit about this recently because it's just so interesting. So
yeah,
yeah,
and how you
definitely.
approach them and eye contact and
Hmm.
what you're wearing and things like that. So really addressing them, or when you're addressing people in general, addressing them at their level, coming to them with some sort of commonality always works. So having
Yeah.
an elder with them or something like that. Even in our community, it's the same thing. If they want to initiate a public uh, service or a policy, they get
Mhm.
like the imams involved.
Yeah.
Can you tell your community this? It's the same concept, similar concept. Yeah.
We've
Yeah,
just got an
for sure.
additional guest on our episode
Yeah.
today.
Hello.
As somebody decided to have a short nap, so
It's
that's all right.
you. That's
Um,
okay.
Something I wanted to ask you about, Fatima, is how you navigate a lot of the information online around weight loss in your clinical practice. So, I know even for me as a health professional, I hop on Instagram and I'm constantly reading about, calories in, calories out, calorie deficit. Um, Obviously there's a lot there's a huge saturation of just information around weight loss, and also gimmicks and all of the like sort of in the online space. So how do you address that with your clients in a culturally sensitive way?
Yeah, so I guess it depends what the topic is, but like for example, like in the African populations, they're really big on like um, natural approaches. So just like you were saying just now, Mariam, about the imams, right? They get a lot of their health information from the churches, from the priests. So I remember there was this phase where there was a lot of priests in the community who were like all about the alkaline diet, right? And like every second person was coming at me. Until eventually I realized I saw like a billboard somewhere and I was like, oh my God, they're preaching this stuff at church. Like this is where the information goes down. Like I gotta go and do my sermon there. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So those kind of things, like it's knowing, okay, where are they getting the information from? Like, what is it and what are their goals? And then just going up to them and just saying, okay, I get it. You know, this is how good the success rate is. And this is what your expectations can be from it. As long as it's not going to cause you harm, I'm happy for you to, let's say they're doing coffee and lemon water. That's like the fave, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so like they even have Facebook groups where there's like thousands of people and they're all on this thing. And then you start bringing in, okay, well, like how's the diarrhea? Or like, you bring in the cons of it. I'm like, but don't you miss your like, and like I'll mention their staple food, which will be like in Shima, and you'll just slowly like first enter I always like to like entertain the idea, lay it out, explain how it works, see if they've had any stories from their friends that have managed to do it long term, and then give them the opportunity to be able to say, okay, well, you can try XYZ. Here's the pros and cons, but here's the like foundational stuff that you will also work on. So we will also work on eating better. We will also work on moving more. And I always like to say it's like that's the recipe for the cake, right? You can come in and make really pretty icing and put little like flowers on it or whatever it is. I'm like, that's the extra stuff. It makes the cake good, but if the foundation is not there, you don't have the eggs, the milk, the flour, whatever it is, no matter how beautiful the cake looks, you're not going to have a good cake because the foundation is not right. So it's like you have to give them that option to make them not feel like stupid, that it's like, oh, okay, that I did the wrong thing, but it's like this is where it is, and like empower them with, okay, this is what you need to do as well. And then I guess strike that balance, but very respectfully to say that, you have there's more you can do, and build that rapport, right? I'm here to help you. You want to do that? Cool. Here's my number. Keep in touch with me. Let's keep going. Because ultimately, I want them to come back. Because I know once
Yeah.
they've tried lemon and coffee for 2 weeks, they will be back. And then that's what you build on it after that.
Yeah. I love your approach. I love that you come in very gentle and very at their level rather
Mm,
than sort of, I guess, talking to them. You're talking with them.
Yeah.
I love that.
And I think,
Yeah.
moving away from always just focusing on numbers,
mm,
is really helpful in this climate where, everything is very metric based, going
yeah,
to your doctor, it's like you're going to get weighed, and, everything is so much about a number or a figure. And people tend to really hyper fixate on that, even if they might have felt good about how they were looking, they might see a number or, again, fixate on things that they didn't necessarily used to, and that can change the way they feel.
yeah.
So I think, coming from more of a,
Holistic.
holistic sort of
Yeah.
approach, as opposed to, hey, I want you to consume 1,600 calories a day
Just
for
the
the next 8 to
standard,
12
yeah.
weeks,
Mm.
and then we'll do a maintenance phase. And then, so there's all these big numbers and concepts that a lot of people also don't understand and don't
Yeah, you
resonate.
just lose them. You lose them. And like a lot of the time in my consultations, that initial session is a conversation, because my ultimate goal is for you to feel safe and like be able to open up, and us and me be able to create the environment where you can actually, I can pinpoint this is what you need to work on. And then once we have that, then we start getting a little bit more into stuff. And I do have clients, and that's usually their personalities and or their past experiences, where they'll ask about it. How many calories? Are you going to do this? Are you going to do that? And some type A people, they get a lot of security out of knowing that everything's being counted
Yeah.
and whatever. So you have like, there's also that has to be that degree of flexibility, and we're like, okay, this one is going to be we got to sit down and talk calories and really get into things. But for the bulk of women, they just want to feel heard, and they want to know that how they feel or what they're doing or whatever it is going to be something that they can do. And then later on, like as we get into like week 6, week 8, they're feeling confident, they've got their mental game in check, then we can start getting a little bit more into, okay, I think you need to eat more protein, because people feel really overwhelmed if I review their food diaries and I tell them what's wrong with their meals. Like they straight away just feel like, oh, like they
Feel like
feel
you're
it's a
being
it's a
attacked.
defense. It's like,
You're
oh,
attacking me. Yeah.
yeah. And I watched that in uni. I saw it in all our like pracs, how they would talk to clients, and then how they would also talk about clients afterwards. And I was like, they're human beings. Like they're not numbers. And I think that, yeah, that's the way I was like, I'm gonna do things differently. I'm like, I'm not gonna do it that way. I'm gonna do it almost more like a counseling session. I feel like my sessions are more like that.
Love that.
And you know, you mentioned earlier on in terms of like, you know, understanding their motivations, and I guess like a lot of it is a little bit of a psychological sort of process too, in terms of the way we view foods and the way we choose different foods. And there's a lot of internal chatter that kind of plays a big role in this whole discussion around weight management. So I think it's such an underrated kind of part of what we do when we're talking with clients about their diet and what they eat. We're actually addressing so much more of their beliefs
Yeah.
than it is, you know, changing their physically changing their diet per se.
Understanding their motivations for things, understanding their backgrounds and why they make the choices they make, breaking all that down so you can really get to the core issue of why they've developed this pattern or this, you know, behavior or way of eating.
Yeah, and it's hard, I guess, to portray that online a lot of the time because it's like people come or are attracted to because they want the recipe or they want the list of snacks that they can have or whatever it is. And that's generally how we tend to attract them. But then the work that you end up doing with people as nutritionists, as dietitians, is just so much more than that. And it's just so complex. But yeah, the perception of what nutritionists, dietitians do is very different.
You mentioned earlier on in our chat today about working with people at different sizes, and I'm just curious about your where you sort of stand with the haze, so health at every size, and yeah, like how you, if you implement that in practice, how you implement that, and sort of what your clients think about that. Because so weight loss is not an area that I personally enjoy working with whatsoever. So I have sent a lot of people to your page that are after sustainable weight loss. And I always found that, you know, I always found a lot of barriers sort of discussing that, you know, again, moving away from the stigma that, you know, just because you're carrying more fat that you're inherently very unhealthy. So that's sort of my belief, but I'd love to know sort of where you sit with the health at every size sort of movement. And for our listeners, there is I'll call it a movement because it is a very big sort of movement online. And some people are very averse to that whole way of thinking. They're like, if you're carrying more fat, you're more at risk of cardiovascular disease, and let's not dance around it, and blah, blah, blah. So yeah, you see two very vast ends of the spectrum when it comes to carrying more fat. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think you know, those principles or that concept that if you're big, you're unhealthy versus if you're small or skinny, you're healthy, it has never been something that sat well with me. And we already know, like I can honestly tell you, people with high cholesterol, I've had more come through the door that are active and skinny than people who are considered overweight, right? So I definitely don't subscribe to that belief, and those principles that are within the health at every size is definitely something that I've used from without realizing that it was coined a thing for a long time. So yeah, having that recognition that what are your non-scale kind of victories, that's always been my focus point. Even when I've got women to track their progress, it's always, am I sleeping better? Have I got more energy? Is my mood improved? Like don't even let my clients track their weights until I feel like they're ready for it. And I get some people who are, you can see like in that whole headspace that, okay, these guys are ready, they're not going to get affected. But other people, it's different. So definitely believe on just getting them to love themselves, no matter what size their body is in, and defining health beyond a number or a physical appearance is a big part of what I definitely do, because
more confident in my clothes, for
yes,
example.
yeah, Yeah, and confidence in your clothes could literally be that I don't feel bloated or whatever it is. It doesn't necessarily mean that I have to go down 2 dress sizes, right? Um, but of course, there's always that fine line between, the Hass way of doing things versus the body positivity movement that has also got its extremes. I think everything there's tail ends of things on the spectrum where you'll see it's like, okay, that's missing the mark now. Okay, that one's going too far away. Where you got to stay in that middle ground. But yeah, it's like finding the way to basically, I guess, enhance the quality of their life is the goal. Like
Is that,
it's
do you have
why
the
do you want
same
to do it?
perspective depending where the fat is distribution is on the body? Do you have that same approach?
Sorry, I missed the first part of your
So
question.
do you have that same philosophy or that same approach depending on the distribution of fat on the body? So
Yeah.
you still have that same approach? If, for example,
Well,
you're
yeah,
saying
it depends. Like
fat,
I guess
yeah.
for some women, what is that, like the pear shape, right? We know that visceral fat ultimately carried on the abdomen area is the key one with regards to health conditions, chronic diseases, all those sorts of things. And I will always explain that to people that, this is the risks around carrying that weight here. So, I tell them if you're going to start your day, and I'm going to give you like, a 10, 20 kilo bag and ask you to kind of strap it on your back and then do your day the way you normally would. You just wouldn't function the same. I'm like, it's the same with all your vital organs that sit in this area. You want to keep them as comfortable as possible so that they can function their best, right? And of course, where people distribute their fat is very genetic. Some people are going to, have heavy arms. Some people are going to carry a lot on their torso. And then those who are heavier in the lower part, they might struggle with back issues or strains on their knees and those kind of things. So it's like the risks are different in the different parts that you store it, but it's also totally genetic. So I think it's always just about getting women to understand where's that risk and at what point do I need to worry, and making sure that I did my best. Basically, that's all it is. I've done my due diligence to myself, to my body. I've looked after it, and I always, will always, if I'm working with Muslim women, I will always get them to look back and like, you're gonna go back to Allah and go, I looked after the body you gave me. Like, are you happy with that? Like, if you can feel that, like, then cool. Like, then you don't have to sometimes obsess over the details of it all. You're just like, I'm doing my best to make the choices. I'm staying as active as I can. I'm going to bed as much as I can. And most women just don't speak to themselves kindly enough, the same way that they would, their child or their best friend or whatever it is. And it's that self compassion for ourselves that we also need to just give ourselves a break sometimes and just go, maybe I am doing my best and maybe this is just me.
Yes, I love that so much. And especially, as mums and, myself being a new mum and a lot of our listeners are mums, going through the life transitions where your body is going through changes. Like I'm definitely still in that kind of postpartum phase where I'm like, do I like my body? I don't know. Like some days I wake up and I'm like feeling so confident, and other days I'm like, oh, I'm not used to this.
Yeah.
But like you said, it's that being kind to yourself piece, and also understanding where you're at in your journey, understanding that life is like different seasons, and in different seasons you might look a little bit different, and sort of, yeah, coming to terms and finding peace in that and in that season that you're in.
Yeah.
And just you're focusing more on the things that you can control, because
Mhm.
sometimes this is my perspective, like sometimes we can't always control, like you said, where we're like, genetically where I put on fat, right? But I can control, how much I move my body. I can
Yes.
control, what foods I choose to eat. Obviously, like given that I'm in a privilege to make that decision. I can choose, how much I want to over hyperfixate or think about these things as well. So, focusing on the habits that we can change and that we can focus on, and then whatever happens as a result of that, hopefully is what, there's the things that are the things like having more energy, having better sleep, all that sort of
Yeah.
stuff. And then if weight loss happens as a side note, then that's wonderful.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think, I love that, you've got this sort of, holistic approach to the whole
Yeah.
sort of conversation. And I think that's always been the missing piece in the weight loss industry. It's always, it's always, this is the recommendation, and there's sort of no flexibility around that. I know Miriam and I were also talking about, obviously we're in are you all right there, mate? Are you okay? We were talking about this, the shift towards weight loss medications as well. So is this something that you're seeing a lot of in practice? And obviously for our listeners, we're talking about things like Ozempic. So how do you navigate, this sort of era? Because this is something that I wasn't seeing this in practice
Okay.
when I graduated,
Yeah.
but I'm finding that now the push towards, weight loss medications is very high,
Yeah.
and there's a little bit of abuse potentially. But what are your thoughts on
Yeah.
the use of weight loss medications?
Yeah, so I guess weight loss medication's actually been around for a really long time. Ozempic gained stardom, which is why it's in our face so much recently, right? But we've had oral and injectable sort of weight loss medications around for a very long time. I think the oral ones were more popular, and I still had, even 10 years ago in private practice in Brisbane, people coming through and they would be on weight loss medication because their doctor would have prescribed it to them. But of course, the stardom of Ozempic really, really pushed this whole topic into the spotlight recently. And because it has been so, I guess, what's
Talked
that
about.
word? Like just not traumatized, but put on a
Sensationalized.
pedestal, whatever it is. Yeah. Everyone's learned about it, so everyone's asking about it. Big pharma's like, cool, I can make money on it. So then all the doctors are being pushed to prescribe it more. It's a whole thing, right? But ultimately, there's always been a set of criteria for weight loss medication. It's you've done the basics, you're really struggling with it, your BMI is well over, we don't even use BMI anymore, but it's still the standard that they use. But you're well over into that obese kind of classification. And you've got at least one health condition. So you are pre-diabetic or you're already hypertensive. So you're struggling and you really need the help, and your body needs that little bit. We can't just completely leave you for 6 months to try lifestyle anymore. And those usually would be the indications where the doctor would be like, okay, let's give you a kickstart, let's help you, let's start you on it. And if the doctor's good, they would work in conjunction with the dietitian, and the dietitian would be working on your foundational habits while that medication is starting to take effect. As we come off that medication, you fall back into good habits that you've already started building, which is the same goal with Ozempic as well. It's just that the side effects are a little bit more intense than some of the oral medications, which is all of those different impacts on your gut motility. So nausea, for some people even vomiting, diarrhea, constipation, the heartburn side of things. And then of course you get your reduction in appetite, but you also don't end up drinking as much water. So dehydration is a risk as well. If you're not eating as much and you're not choosing the right foods, risk of nutritional deficiencies. So those have always existed, I guess, with weight loss medication. But because Ozempic is injectable and it works slightly different, there tends to be more side effects generally for people. So I guess the goal for dietitians is, if someone's been prescribed it, lay it out. This is what's going to do for you. This is what your expectations should be from it. Essentially, it's a kickstart. There might be some negative side effects. You might get hardly any. Someone else might get a lot. I can't tell you what's going to happen to your body. So when they're informed, it makes all the difference to go, okay, I know what I'm signing up for. I want to do this. I've tried everything. I'm ready for it. And I think that's really helpful. Sometimes people will be like, oh, wow, the doctor just gave me the prescription and they didn't even explain any of that. And then it's like, okay, well, it's totally up to you. The prescription is there. If you want to start it, I'm here to support you. My goal is to build your foundation. So when you come off this medication, you keep going and the weight loss doesn't just go the opposite way. and we focus on building those habits anyway. So yeah, it's about I guess navigating those side effects, looking at the pros and cons, and just supporting people through the process rather than just giving them a prescription. No dietitian involved, no counseling involved, and just then what ends up happening is they come back, they lose all this muscle mass, which makes you feel really crappy and fatigued. It's affected their mental health because they've constantly dealt with all these gut issues. So, yeah, it's all about just the right approach towards it, and it can be a tool, but it's with anything. You gotta, like, if I'm gonna give you a brand new tool, you gotta be shown how to use it. You gotta understand how it works best. That way you're gonna get the most out of it, and it's not going to be something that's going to negatively impact you and you have no benefit from it. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I feel like it's
Yeah.
the new sort of gastric band. I remember like when 20 years ago, probably more than that now, and the gastric band was a
Yeah.
thing. And this is more accessible, it's easier to do. But the gastric band, I remember a lot of people, for example, the band broke,
Yeah.
at some point because, like you said, they didn't maintain those dietary habits. The same way now, for example, with Ozempic, they stop Ozempic and then they put the weight back on, and then they go back to the doctor a few months later, and then he puts them back on Ozempic, or the other one is Manjaro.
Yeah.
And so you're just going to be stuck in this kind of endless cycle if you're not really fixing, like you said, the foundations
Yeah.
of what your actual issue is. You're not changing
Yeah.
lifestyle factors. You're not making it a lifestyle change,
Yeah.
rather than, okay, this is just a diet or a quick
Yeah.
fix, as they like to say.
Yeah, it's
Um,
it's simply a tool. It's
yeah,
it's one of multiple tools that exist to help you get to where you want to be, right? Is it the tool for you? I don't know. You could achieve it differently, but it's not everyone's solution, right? So it's just a matter of, does this work for you? Are you in the space where you are a good candidate for this? Are you ready? Are you prepared? Can you do it? It's all about just having a really good team to support you through it, because you're not meant to be on these things long term. It's a Kickstarter, as I like to say. And then you still have to build the foundation of the cake.
and we can
Think
thank
about
social
it.
media for making it such a
Yeah.
sensation, as the man said.
Mm. Yeah, I think there's Ozempic face is like the thing that they talk about, how it's like really because you're losing your muscle
Yeah,
tension and things like that, so your face changes.
yeah.
That's been a really big one I've seen around.
Um, uh, would you coin it as like a quick fix? I know people see it as a quick fix. I don't think it's that quick, but
Hmm.
is that how it's viewed, as a quick fix?
It definitely can be. I think it would be, because if you're not doing it correctly, then you're going to get a temporary solution, and then you're going to go back to where you are. Because it's the same graphs that we're seeing,
Mm.
right? Like how often or how many people are regaining the weight afterwards. It's the same curve that we see with all the other fad diets that are out there. It's not like there's this massive long-term effect, right? And there's some people that Ozempic doesn't even work for them because they body doesn't respond to it very well. Like I've got
Yeah,
people who are like, yeah, I'm on the second dose and haven't felt anything. I'm like, okay,
with
well,
yeah, with
not
all
be
these,
your body's different.
yeah, exactly. I think with all these little, I would still call Ozempic a fad because of the way
Mm.
it's sort of marketed.
Yeah, the way it's
Um,
been marketed for sure.
yeah, but all these fads, they've come and gone, and we still haven't learned to sort of realize, okay, there's an underlying issue here. Like, I remember when fat free was a thing. This is back in the early 2000s, and everyone would, you had this what was it called? Was it Weight Watchers. And they were selling these chocolates that were fat free. So people actually, what they did was actually ate more of them because they're like, well, it's fat free, I'm good here, this is. So we end up in that kind of same circle with that same mentality, thinking, okay, I'm just going to do this and not change anything else in my life, and I'm going to be all good. So we keep repeating this kind of cycle, not addressing the underlying causes and getting to the actual issue. But like you said, when there's money to be made, it makes a whole world of difference
Yeah.
in the way things are marketed and the way things are sold and addressed to people.
Yeah. I mean, the weight loss industry is, it's a I think, no, I'm not even multi-billion dollar. I think it's something like a certain amount of trillion is made every year. Um, So why would anyone want the fads to stop if they're
Yeah.
making money out of it? It's a very deeply rooted, complex topic, because it's like there's people who want you to constantly want to lose weight, It's just, yeah, it's you can go in deep into to where it's all coming and how all the influences and everything,
Feeding
but
on women's insecurities, I think.
yeah,
What
it,
does
it's high, strongly linked with
women of color,
the
beauty
beauty
standards.
industry as
And it's not like
well.
I want to lose weight. It's like I want to look like this. Like when you go to the hairdresser and I want this kind of hairstyle, I want to look like that. And you're like, yeah, but
Hmm.
that's not your body type. So you're probably not going to look like that. Did you want to add anything else
Yeah, for sure.
in the thing? I can't see your questions
Um,
before I move on to something else.
no, I think, sorry, a little bit of intermission there had to pop out. I think Fatima covered it really well.
Okay.
And I think, yeah, in general, like women of color are often the ones that are targeted when it comes to a lot of this sort of, a lot of these fads I find online, as far as, finding different ways to lose weight. And so having that education in our communities and with people that look like us and for women of color is so important,
Yeah.
because I think it's like,
Yeah, and like just like something that I guess comes into my mind is also like as women, you know, as women who don't look like the women that we've grown up seeing, right? There's also an element of you try harder to look good,
Mm.
right? That's going to be a reality, right? Like if you whether it's you wear hijab or you have darker skin or you're hairier than whatever it is, like as women from different cultures, because it has never been strongly represented within the media that we see all of the time. Yes, we're far more susceptible to these things because growing up, we're striving to look like something that we're not and trying to be something that we're not, whether it's the tone of our skin or the shape of our body or, whatever it is. And it's, I guess things are changing and but it doesn't take away the generations and generations of beauty standards that's already been inbuilt in us. And we still have our generations within us, whether it's our parents or our grandparents, who still view beauty in the way that they were taught it. So
Like a
we're
universal
far
standard
more.
is set and everyone's trying to achieve that. But when we go back to our countries, for example, I know when I went back to my country, the beauty standard was different.
Yeah.
And it was actually a lot nicer, and I felt more like, oh, accepted for my body type, the big butt, the big, the curves, rather than, I guess in Australia you kind of have that, the girl next door look,
Yeah.
which was the standard.
Yeah.
So that whole moving away from that universal beauty standard, universal way of looking, universal way of eating, that kind of stuff is really important in this kind of atmosphere,
Yeah,
which would
women
lead,
need.
sorry, go.
Yeah, women basically just need to stop needing outside approval to love
Yeah.
themselves. That's all it really comes down to, is just caring what others think. That's the rooted element of it all. If you don't care, I'm like, great, teach me how to do it. I wish it was a pill for that. But that's
It's hard not
the
to be
element that
by
we're
our
fighting against, and
Yep,
it's deep.
exactly. Which would lead me to then ask the question, is there cultural aspects across the board that you feel like is a common problem, no matter what culture you deal with when it comes to dietary factors? Yeah.
I guess from dietary factor point of view, like every culture is going to have their rich dishes, the ones that are not necessarily suitable for everyday consumption, yet we do eat them every day. There's always going to be that element. Like every culture is going to have those dishes that they should be just occasionally on celebrations that they eat far too often. Every culture is susceptible to the impact of ultra processed food and the exposure that's within their environment that tends to be pretty uniform. All of those core things, movement, sleep, like there's a lot of base things that that we're all kind of susceptible to. It's just that a lot of the time, I guess the foods might all look different in these situations.
Yeah.
The barriers might be different. Like, for example, in some communities, especially, let's say Indian communities, for example, who are much more family orientated compared to a standard Western community, you're going to have the impact of, everyone's opinions and the aunties telling you what they think and giving their opinion, like I always tell my husband, like, this is the approach that I now use for everything when it comes to me as a dietitian. Have someone sparking some diet question at me, I'm just like, now I just learned from Madagascar, I'm just like, smile and wave. Just smile and wave, boys. Like, that's it. I'm not having this conversation with you. So
You
it's,
man have
yeah.
learned the art of doing that too now.
Yeah, literally, I'm like, that's it.
Sure,
Smile and
yeah,
wave,
like
boys.
that. All
That's
right,
it.
go for it. Knock yourself out.
Yeah, because the opinions are there. They're strongly rooted. They believe it. Um, and we've got to just slowly have the conversations with our daughters, with our children, change things as we go, on how we
Yeah.
view all
Have
of
you noticed in your experience, so you've been a dietitian overseas and you've come and you're a dietitian here.
it.
Do you feel like there has been, for example, the way that they've eaten in Southern Africa was fine and they didn't have any inflammatory markers, they didn't have cardiovascular disease, they didn't have gut issues. But then, for example, they've immigrated to a Western country, they're eating the same food, but now they're starting to have problems. Have you experienced that?
Yeah, so they call it the migration effect. So
Yeah.
we see it like, and I think there's been a few studies actually done on different refugee populations coming into Australia where you're seeing obviously the access has increased, their socioeconomic status has increased, but then they don't have the necessarily the knowledge to know that, okay, that's not so good for me. I mean, I am an immigrant myself, right? When I migrated as an 11-year-old girl from Zimbabwe to Australia, going into like Coles and Woolworths and seeing all of those different chips, I went gaga. Like, potato crisps are my jam. And I'm like, whoa, like, look at this. And so for like a good couple of years, I had to try everything. Like, I had to try them all. And I used that as an emotional tool to actually really settle into the country. I would
Yeah.
just like go to the shops. What is the new crisps that are out there? You know what I mean? And I never had that kind of access in Zimbabwe growing up. Like, we had one or two brands. It was there sometimes, but it wasn't this access that I had here. And so yeah, I remember gaining a good 10 kilos in that first 4 or 5 years, purely because I was just like, ooh, what are these and what are those, and having this and having that. And then even my parents was like, it was like a novelty, it's like, oh, all of these things that we didn't have before, and oh, so many different flavors. And so there is an element before you pause and go, oh wait, what impact is this actually having on me? You're not going to have someone that's going to necessarily tell you. It's so there's lots of things that happen when you migrate. It's that transition period, and of course, if someone was used to a very simple traditional diet and they're now going into like full on eating Western ultra processed foods, that's going to have a huge impact on them for sure. So I mean, I even came from a high literacy background and I also experienced that, so it's not like it's unique to refugee populations, right? But I
Yeah.
feel like migration has a big impact on your mental health. And then it's like, I feel like a big part is the emotional element of, oh, okay, well, let's try all of this kind of thing as well.
And we see that with, for example, child obesity. I've spoken about this before, but we're quick to blame the parents for like, oh, you're in charge of your child's, calories and what they eat. You're the one who's, preparing their meals. How is your child obese? And yet, like you said, the health literacy, not everyone knows a packet of chips, how many calories that has in it. It might look like a little bit, we don't know how calorie dense it is. And so it's that whole education around, okay, this is like a high calorie dense food. That's something that, you have to be aware of. And yeah, just understanding what you're eating is really important when it comes to these kind of, like you said, immigration. And like you said, even outside of immigration, not everyone has that knowledge when it comes to what, like it could be like, 100-gram chip packet, but compared to like 100 grams of berries, the calories are going to be totally different in that sense.
Yep.
So yeah, did you want to?
No, I think that's the cue. I've really enjoyed this discussion today. Is there anything, Fatima, that you would like to, I guess, conclude our conversation with today? Is there any message you've sort of got for our listeners, or specifically for the women of color listening to that are going to listen to this episode, maybe navigating some of these thoughts around weight loss?
Yeah, I think, I guess any woman of color, any woman like from different cultural backgrounds where you don't see yourself represented in the weight loss industry, um, start searching and looking out there, because there's more and more people who are starting to talk about cultural foods, right? So don't try and apply yourself to the standard, and just remember that you are unique. And also
Yeah.
remember that weight loss is really complex. It is not as simple as calories in, calories out, do this diet, get the results. So if the biggest thing I can get women to do is work on your expectations. When you change your expectations,
Yeah.
everything changes. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like that's one of the biggest game changers, because it shifts your mindset. You approach weight loss differently. You also are able to honor yourself as a unique individual and give yourself the opportunity to go out and find a solution that's unique to you. But I think yeah, that's probably like my most golden like piece of advice is really sit down and reflect and think about, who am I? What is my culture? What are my goals? And how am I going to make this unique solution for me? Because there is nothing out there that's perfect for you. You know your body, you know
Yeah.
yourself. Oh,
Yeah.
magic. And that's gonna be, I'm like, what is this? What is that?
Celebration time.
I think it's all the new iPhone features. Like,
I
if you
saw
do
a few
certain
popping
hand
up. I was like, oh,
movements,
this is cute.
it does these things. But yeah, if you are trying to find a solution that's going to be perfect for you, it's going to be a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of I know me, and that's going to work for me. And if you're really struggling, of course, go out there and look for people who have more holistic views, who are ready to listen to you and your thoughts, and direct you in the right path and hold your hand a little bit. Not everyone has the same level of motivation.
Yeah.
Some people need a little bit of hand holding in the beginning before they can kind of go off and carry on by themselves. But yeah, just
Yeah.
be kind to yourselves as well.
And you'll be less likely to self-sabotage, I think, if you do have that approach, understanding where you're at, what
Yeah.
you can actually implement and manage. And like you said, reevaluating what your real goals are and what you're trying to achieve, being realistic. Thank you so much, Fatima, for everything, your time, your knowledge. Yes, man standing over here, but where can people find you if they want to know more, if they want to explore cultural diversity in dietetics? If they want to book a consultation with you, your
Yes.
Instagram handle.
I got distracted by the Q face.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I'm like, stop listening. Yeah, so I am on Instagram, cultural_dietitian. I'm currently revamping my website, but my email address is info@eatsmartdietetics.com. And that's pretty much the two key areas that I'm most active. So yeah, find me on Instagram, and then basically the link in my bio will take you to everything else that you need. That's
Fatima, was your
probably
Instagram
easiest.
was it cultural_dietitian?
Yeah, cultural_dietitian. That's it.
And you're doing one-on-ones. Are you doing programs? What was your current offerings?
Yes, so the services that I have, I do work with women one-on-one. I have like a few different, I guess, package options. I will work with you for 6 weeks, 3 months, and those are kind of my typical offers. Once someone's actually a client with me, if they want to work for me for longer, I have a membership. So that's pretty much how I've set things up. And you can see me in person if you're in Brisbane. We do have insurance coverage, bulk billing kind of options. There's a few different things. I think easiest thing is send me a DM. We'll chat. I'll get to know you, figure out what works best for you, and then I will basically direct you in what I feel would be the best for you. But yeah, if you want to do things online, that's all there, no matter where you are in the world. But also have face to face if you're in Brisbane.
Fantastic. Thank you so
Perfect.
much.
Thank you so much, Fatima. We
Thank
love
you
your work.
guys for having me.
We can't wait for our listeners to reap all the benefits from this episode. For our listeners, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, rate us. We are now on YouTube. And
Yeah.
stay tuned for our upcoming episodes over the holiday funky period.
Thank you so much.
Thank you guys.